I get it, cause people's experience different. Check the prejudice at the door. Speak your mind if you give the flow. Tell the truth if it's sweet or sour. Cause the hour we spitting that fire.
Hey everyone, this is Spitting Fire. I'm coming to you with another one, but this one I am coming to you with some tutorials and I'm going to share some videos with you. Some videos that I have used when I was during my college days and, try to share some things with you about the law and some things that I have did in my commentary. So a lot of times when people in these YouTube streets misuse the law or misquote it or misunderstand it and they try to do things and explain it to you or whatever, this is some video that is very helpful for this. And so I think that when we sit up there and we advocating for injustice and fighting against injustice and we're fighting for particular persons, we need to know what the rights are. Now, sometimes the rights doesn't always go in our favor, but you need to know what it is that you're working with so you can go about doing things. There's some things you're going to like, there's some things you're not going to like, but you need to still know it so you know what to do and what not to do. So you don't want to make yourself look crazy out here. So a lot of times we sit up there and a lot of people read a lot of different things of the law and make their own interpretation. So this one right here is going to be talking about due process, and we're going to be talking about the 5th and 14th Amendment. Okay, and once you see this video or whatever, I hope that it is very beneficial to you, and I hope it teaches you. And you can always come back and look at the videos. Okay, you can always come back and look at the video, and you can for things that you don't understand many times before. So if you are one of those people that usually read indictments on your channel or something like that, you can tune into this to go back and forth to sit up there and do a comparative contrast of what you understand and what you don't understand and what is meant. So that way you can have a delivery out here and your people can convey the proper message in what the law is about and what it's not about and what you can do and what you can't do. Okay. And then you have to understand that some of these amendments have been changed, okay, and altered over years and over days and over months. Okay, so because people often go to Congress to get these laws amended and changed all the time. So it may not be updated. It may not be updated right then and there, but it does happen. So right now, some things stay the same, some things change. But here we go to learn something about the basics of what it is that we need to know fighting this fight against for our Robert Sylvester Kelly and Bill Cosby. Okay, and some of the other men that have been done wrong in our legal system as well, whose due process may have been violated. So when we go through a situation to where the courts, the appellate courts, is denying people of their due process, what do we do? And what can we do as a person? Well, I feel like as we can do as people, that I'm going to consult with an attorney on that. However, what a person can do and what a person rights is, this is something that can give you more clear understanding. Make sure y'all pay attention and watch the entire video. And if you like the channel, make sure you subscribe to the video. Okay, make sure you subscribe to the video, hit the like button and everything else. And if you don't, hit the dislike button, hit the notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video. And if you'd like to support it, make sure you cash app Spitting Fire. And if you want to sit up there and have your support go to the Innocent Project, well, then you can make sure you cash out Muting is Bullying. It's in the description below. Okay, enjoy the video.
One of the most important civil rights is the right to due process. Under the 5th and 14th Amendments, prior to the deprivation of life, liberty, or property, the government must provide a person with a fair legal proceeding. Judicial interpretations over the course of a century have provided us with a comprehensive set of rules to interpret this important but vague right. Procedural due process originates in the text of the Due Process Clauses of the United States Constitution's 5th and 14th Amendments. Both amendments provide that neither the federal government nor the state government may deprive an individual of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Since the adoption of these amendments, the definitions of liberty and property have evolved. In the 1923 case, Meyer v. Nebraska, Justice James Clark McReynolds introduced a broad definition of the term liberty that is widely accepted today. In his opinion, he wrote, quote, "Without doubt, liberty denotes not merely freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of the individual to contract, to engage in any of the common occupations of life, to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, establish a home and bring up children, to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience, and generally to enjoy those privileges long recognized at common law as essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men." Later, Supreme Court cases introduced more liberty interests, such as the right to preserve one's good name and the right to pursue a chosen occupation. A deprivation of liberty may occur if a person loses a significant freedom of action, or if the federal or state government denies a freedom provided by a statute or a constitution. For example, if the government wants to restrict a person's ability to legally drive a car, to raise his own children, or to work in a particular field, it's denying that person a liberty. As such, he has certain due process rights. Property means personal belongings or real property. The judiciary has expanded the definition of property interests, however, to also include entitlement to a benefit under federal or state law. Examples of property interests are extensive, including, for example, the right to a free public education. Even if something is not considered an inherent right, once a person has it, depriving it requires due process. So while the right to a free public education is not considered a fundamental right in most states, once the state does provide it, it must afford people due process before it withdraws that education, such as, for example, by suspending or expelling a student. The procedural requirements for effective due process vary based on what right is being deprived. Some of the procedural rights that apply to various types of right deprivations include an unbiased tribunal, which is applicable to criminal cases and detentions for safety purposes, notice of the proposed actions and the grounds asserted for it, this is applicable to almost every deprivation, opportunity to present reasons why the proposed action should not be taken, this is also applicable to most deprivations, including denials of benefits, the right to present evidence, including the right to call witnesses. This is applicable to criminal trials, denials of access to one's children, and comparable deprivations. The right to know the opposing evidence, this is applicable to criminal prosecutions. The right to cross-examine adverse witnesses, also to criminal trials. The opportunity to be represented by counsel, which is also something that's relevant to criminal prosecutions. And the requirement that the tribunal prepare a record of the evidence presented. This is applicable to criminal prosecutions and many administrative hearings. In other cases, there are lesser standards for due process rights. For example, in the case of a suspension of a child from public school, the child has the right to an opportunity to be heard, but not necessarily the right to a full adversarial hearing. In Matthews v. Eldridge, the Supreme Court established a three-part test to determine the appropriate level of due process for a deprivation. 1. Analyze the private interests affected by the official action. 2. Evaluate the risk of an erroneous deprivation of the private interest through the procedures used and the probable value of additional or substitute procedural safeguards. And 3. Analyze the government's interests in administrative and fiscal efficiency. Let's look at each of these factors. Regarding factor number 1, the greater the value of the deprivation, the greater the due process that must be afforded. For example, the Supreme Court has reasoned that real property ownership holds greater intrinsic value than personal property ownership, and therefore that deprivations of real property trigger greater due process protections. Regarding factor number 2, the second Eldridge factor requires a court to examine the risk of wrongful deprivation of an interest and the likelihood that an important interest will be erroneously deprived without safeguards. A court will prescribe additional procedural safeguards if there is a greater possibility that an interest will be wrongfully deprived. In the Eldridge case, the court held that the government did not need to provide a pre-termination hearing prior to curtailing Social Security disability benefits. The court reasoned that the potential value of the hearing was not very high. The ability to challenge the termination after it's put into effect is sufficient. That the pre-termination hearing may provide greater procedural safeguards is insufficient to require those of the government. Let's look now at factor number 3. As additional procedural safeguards require more time and money, they become less likely to be required. The government has an interest in efficiency to not only avoid a backlog of appeals, but also to avoid increased litigation expenses and time-consuming hearings. The issue of providing procedural due process safeguards in the fields of immigration and deportation proceedings has recently been litigated. The government argues that fiscal and administrative burdens of holding formal adjudication hearings for all immigration matters drain the government's limited financial resources. To support this claim, a 2010 study found that the federal government saved $100 million by issuing removal orders without formal adjudication procedures. As such, the government has claimed that it has not violated rights to procedural due process by not affording people extensive pre-deportation hearings. The government's goal of saving time and money can outweigh an individual's property or liberty interests. Of course, this is only one side of the balancing test. The liberty interest of the people being subjected to deprivations must also be considered. Procedural due process prevents the deprivation of one's life, liberty, or property without appropriate procedures to safeguard one's interests. The doctrine has matured over the course of U.S. history and has been key in establishing a democratic society where the government treats its citizens with fairness and respect.